Buenas tardes. Como director general de la Fundación Ramón Areces quisiera darle una bienvenida a todos los participantes en este evento y una especialísima bienvenida a Cecilia Malmström, excomisaria de comercio de la Comisión Europea, y a Will Hutton, director del Hertford College en Oxford y gobernador de la LSE. Ellos representan de alguna u otra forma las distintas sensibilidades que se producen en torno al Brexit, la europea y la más específicamente británica. En cualquier caso, estoy encantado de poder presentar, junto con mi amigo Adam Austerfield, este evento y señalar una vez más la estrecha colaboración que tiene la Fundación Ramón Areces con la London School of Economics. Este es nuestro último acto el año 2020, pero ya tenemos programados varios eventos para el año 2021 para continuar con una asociación. Incluso Adam ha sido muy generoso y la ha llamado alianza, pues ¿por qué no? Una alianza entre la London y la Fundación Ramón Areces. El Brexit, que fue un tema que se suscitó casi naturalmente, es una cuestión de máxima importancia para la Unión Europea y desde luego para España, donde suscita un enorme interés. En cuanto a la Unión Europea, valgan dos datos que me señalaba Adam. Primero, la Unión Europea tenía un superávit de 150 billones de dólares USA y era en 2019 el segundo máximo importador de bienes de Estados Unidos después de China. Segundo, la Unión Europea y Estados Unidos contabilizan casi el 50% del PNB mundial y un tercio de los flujos comerciales. Nosotros hemos tenido especialmente interés en resucitar, a pesar de la urgencia que existe, la atención al Brexit, hasta ahora últimamente un tanto ocultada por la pandemia del coronavirus y por las elecciones presidenciales norteamericanas, que por cierto recuerdo que tuvimos un evento con la London School of Economics hace muy pocos días, y todavía no sabemos qué es lo que va a ocurrir, a pesar de la ciencia aportada por la London School of Economics. En cualquier caso, el Brexit es un tema no solo de una enorme actualidad, pero de una enorme importancia para todos nosotros. Y qué duda cabe que esta importancia son las perspectivas que se dé un acuerdo o no haya acuerdo. Yo no sé el estado de la cuestión, lo último, pero lo que está claro es que es muy importante que sepamos cuáles serían las consecuencias y el alcance de que no hubiera un acuerdo con el Reino Unido, como algunos parecen vaticinar. Yo me quedo ahí porque no tengo más que aportar, y les agradezco muchísimo al profesor Hutton y a Cecilia Malmström que estén con nosotros, y le doy la palabra a Adam Austerfield en nombre de la London School.
Thank you very much, Don Raimundo. Muchísimas gracias a la Fundación. It's a real honor to be here today. My name is Adam Austerfield. I'm president of the LSE alumni here in Spain, and also a visiting fellow at LSE Ideas, which is an international relations think tank at the LSE. I'm delighted to host this second virtual event between the LSE and the Foundation. In the previous 8 years, the Foundation supported a whole series of LSE masterclasses in social science, we've called them, here in Madrid, which is a series of 3-day seminars around a whole range of different topics in the social sciences, the future of Europe, technology, higher education, as well as many more, climate change, inequality, which we've had around 700 of Spain's brightest young things come through the Foundation with LSE teaching for a few days as a mini scholarship to grapple with some of the big issues of the day taught by LSE faculty. And we are enormously grateful to the Foundation for its terrific support over the years. And as always, I would like to thank the director of the Foundation, Don Raimundo Pérez Hernández, and his team on behalf of the LSE and his collaboration on this and future seminars between our institutions. On to today's session, we'll take a global view on some of the most important economic and political issues facing the UK and Europe, including the current COVID-19 pandemic, economic relations with the United States, and the impact of the fast approaching date of the UK leaving the European Union, or Brexit as it's known. And I'm delighted, very delighted to be joined today by two leading experts who have vast experience of politics, economics and policy on this wide range of issues for today's session. First of all, I would like to introduce Dr. Cecilia Malmström, who has a highly distinguished career in public service, both in Sweden as a Minister for EU Affairs between 2006 and 2010, and then EU Commissioner for Internal Affairs from 2010 to 2014, and then EU Commissioner for Trade until 2019, this time last year. At which time, in the same year, she was also appointed International Swede of the Year, which is quite an honor, and many congratulations to you, Cecilia, for that. She has a PhD in the University of Gothenburg, where she currently holds the Asa Gabrielsson Visiting Professorship, although I personally wish she was also visiting the London School of Economics as well, and perhaps you could do that sometime in the future. I think that would also make us very happy. Secondly, I'd like to introduce Will Hutton, who's also a highly distinguished career which spans many disciplines. He's been an influential and high-level economic and social policy advisor to UK government administrations, and has also had a career in political and economic journalism, as an economics correspondent on Newsnight, which is the main news analysis and reporting broadcast in the UK, and later editor of The Observer, one of the main Sunday newspaper publications in the UK. He is the author of numerous books, including most famously The State We're In and The World We're In, but also many more, during which, after the late 90s, he also founded the Work Foundation, and he is currently chair of the Big Innovation Centre in the UK. On the academic side, Will has, I believe, 9 honorary doctorates and visiting fellowships in the UK, and has been president of Hertford College, Oxford, for the last 8 years or so. But most importantly of all, he is a governor of the London School of Economics and Political Science, for which we are also grateful for your help in steering that ship through difficult times and being part of and interacting with and writing with many of our wonderful faculty we have at the LSE as well, Will. So we're very grateful for you to joining us both today. So what we thought we would do first is have just a few comments, first of all, on a kind of state of where we are from your perspectives. I'll ask Cecilia to go first, a sort of view from the European Union, the big picture, the challenges ahead for the EU and the global economy for a few moments, and then Will, if you would be happy to talk about the UK in particular, of challenges ahead, Brexit, future global relations, and of course the two are very related. But first of all, thank you very much for joining us. Cecilia, over to you for a few minutes, and we'll come to the questions after that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody who is listening or looking at this. Thank you, Adam, for that kind introduction, and for the Foundation for inviting me. I'm looking very much forward to this discussion. Well, we live in very difficult times. Obviously, the COVID crisis have impacted the whole world, and in the European Union, of course, seeing increased numbers of hospitalized and dead people. It's affecting politics, health, social life, and very much the economy. And while there was hope for a small recovery during the summer, most countries in the European Union right now are in a second wave of the pandemic. And yesterday, the European Commission published its European economic forecasts, where it's quite gloom, and it predicts that the fall of GDP this year in the European Union will be almost 8% in average, and it will be much higher in countries like Spain, for instance, and others. There will be a recovery next year of 4.2%, and in 2022, 3%, provided that this second wave doesn't turn into a third wave. There's so much uncertainty there, of course. The European Union historically agreed on a recovery fund. It was a bit slow to react in the beginning of the crisis and the pandemic, but before the summer, there was an agreement of a quite unique fund consisting of joint bonds, borrowing the markets together. So 750 billion euros is now to be distributed as loans and grants to the different countries, and member countries are now in the process of drafting their recovery programs. Hopefully, there will be very soon an agreement between the Council and the European Parliament, who has to agree for the fund to sort of be started to pay out. And then we can start distributing that money to the countries. This, of course, has to focus on a sustainable recovery. It has to be innovative, it has to be digital, it has to be forward-looking and resilient. It's not money to put in black holes for companies who were already in trouble before the crisis. And this will be watched very carefully by other member states. It was not easy to get to this solution, so member states will be watching each other, and the European Parliament, and of course the Commission and the public. And I hope academia as well will follow this and make evaluations and so on. There also has to be reforms in the internal market. This is long due, so this is the time to make it. The internal market is the crown jewel of the European Union, but there's still a lot of things remaining to be done in order to facilitate a full free trade of all goods and services between the member countries, especially in the service sectors, where there are lots of old obstacles and hindrances remaining on very technical issues such as licenses, guarantees, standards, public procurement, boring and technical, but extremely important for the economy. And then there are lots of programs that were sort of launched just before the crisis on the Green Deal, a new trade policy, a new industrial policy, a new digital policy. That as well has to be adopted to fit in the general recovery and in the relaunch of the economy, taking into account the quite unstable international situation that we are in as well, and we'll come back to that later. And then before I end, of course, this week and the coming weeks, we will need to focus immediately on getting a Brexit deal done. It has been very difficult. There are still many hurdles remaining. Just recently, there was an intense period of negotiations again. There is progress made, but there's still difficulties remaining on the fisheries, on the standards, and on the issue of state aid and level playing field. So really hope that there can be an agreement. Clock is ticking very, very quickly right now because an agreement has to be translated in the European Union and agreed by the European Parliament and member states, and of course correspondingly in the UK before it can enter into force in New Year. If there is no agreement, then of course UK will be a third country like many other countries, and the trade will be done through WTO standards, but there will be lots of areas where we will still cooperate. We are friends, neighbors, allies, and that will have to be sorted out as well. And then trade negotiations probably, hopefully, can resume a little bit later. I still haven't given up hope that there will be an agreement very soon, but it's looking increasingly difficult, and we are now almost, not far away from Christmas, so results have to be shown very, very quickly. I think I'll stop there because I'm looking forward very much to hear what Will is saying as well, and to the discussions and the questions. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. That's a great overview. Will, you have a huge international background as well, but we are asking you to talk a bit about the UK as well and the connections therein. So perhaps you could give us your points of view, or where we are, or where we think we are in the UK in terms of overall relations and when it comes to Brexit at the moment. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I think the the Johnson government will be assessing the Biden presidency, and that I think may change the dynamic of the talks in the days ahead. There is no doubt that Joe Biden would regard any trade deal with the UK as impossible if there was not a trade deal with the EU, and if as a result going it alone, as Britain would have to do, the Good Friday Agreement would be endangered. So I think that the political pressure on Johnson to have a deal is growing intense. Only the day we're recording this interview, there was the National Audit Office in Britain released its assessment of just how even with some kind of trade deal, there would be massive interruption at British ports. 2-hour waits, huge queues of lorries, big interruptions to trade, and the kind of dislocation in the first 6 months of next year is going to be acute, even if there is a deal. There is public opinion in Britain has moved very strongly in favour, interestingly, of the European Union. If there was a referendum held now, I think there's little doubt it would be won by the Remain side. And everything has been complicated, of course, by COVID. An astonishing kind of economic package has just recently been announced by the British government, having wanted to row back from supporting people on furlough. It's now announced a furlough scheme that will last until March. And the Bank of England has announced it's going to spend a further £150 billion on buying government bonds. Kind of in a sense, the Bank of England now is financing an enormous budget deficit, which will exceed 20% of GDP in this current financial year, in order to get the UK through the COVID crisis without a stunning and impossible increase in unemployment. And that shadow kind of hangs over economic kind of projections for 2021 and 2022. My own view is that the UK economy will not recover to pre-COVID levels of output until the first half of 2022, and then after, or there's kind of the economists say, and the best guess is that actually COVID will cost the UK economy cumulatively over the next 10 to 15 years a lost 7.5% of GDP. In other words, it will grow that cumulatively that degree less. But the cost of leaving the European Union, even with a thin no quotas, no tariffs trade deal, which is the best we can hope for at this stage, that will cost another 8% of lost GDP. Put those numbers together, the British economy in the middle of the next decade and middle of the 2030s will be 15% smaller than it would otherwise have been. And the long-run growth rate in Britain, which is currently, until COVID broke, around 2.25%, will fall to 1.25%, which is close to economic stagnation. And my personal view is that the European Union will be looked back on with enormous affection by the British electorate. And I'm going to place a bet for you and your and your audience that actually Britain, which already has, interestingly enough, the strongest pro-European movement in the EU, and we managed to have demonstrations for a people's vote, 3 in succession, with over 1 million people on each of them. Remember, there's never been such big street protests in Britain on anything. There was only 1 million against the Iraq War, and 3 protests of this type to stay in the European Union. Campaigning for people's vote was extraordinary. I think there's going to be an increasing lobbying for a close association with the European Union kind of over the next 5 years. Will there be a deal? Certainly the Treasury would love a deal. The Bank of England is assumed a deal in its economic forecast released at the time of it announced the 150 billion quantitative easing that I just referred to. It hangs in the balance, as Cecilia said. The big stumbling block is a level playing field. Michel Barnier has said that to in his briefing to kind of EU member states, and the British government, in particular Dominic Cummings, the kind of Cummings breeze behind Boris Johnson, is very anxious that Britain should have the maximum capacity to support new industries with state subsidies, and the EU is correctly wary of that. I think it hangs in the balance. Insiders inside number 10 tell me that Boris Johnson, in particular the Prime Minister, has become more and more convinced that there should be a clean break from the European Union. Certainly, if you want to get anywhere in Whitehall and you want to get access to the Prime Minister, you better be a Brexiter, and you better be a hard Brexiter. No other people kind of going to look in his immediate circle. And I'm quite concerned that there won't be a deal. So I think we must look forward to a very thin deal, if there is anything at all, and a possibility of there being no deal. That will only be the beginning of it, though. I mean, even some of the more tendentious and argumentative and vitriolic kind of levers. I mean, George Eustace, the environment minister, privately said there may not be a deal on January the 1st, but he thinks there will be a deal by the summer. In other words, I think that the disruption that's going to take place will force the British government's hand. And also, actually, some of the disruption in Europe. I mean, access to British fisheries is very important. Britain has 1 million square miles of sea, and at the moment, the bulk of it is actually farmed by EU member states and not by the British government, one of the sticking points in these negotiations. And retaining access to that as the quid pro quo for relieving some of this dislocation on both sides of the channel, I think will, even the Brexiters can see, force a deal in the kind of middle of next year. And then there will have to be negotiations over services, over financial services, the creative industries, Erasmus, research and development. Actually, the fact that Britain is part of Europe is inescapable. And so I'm expecting there to be a rupture and then a gradual coming together in the years that follow. But that's going to have cost the British economy dearly. Years of low growth, exacerbated by COVID. And I think the case for a closer association with the European Union, both for geopolitical reasons, which we will discuss in a minute, and actually for domestic economic and social reasons, will become ever more urgent. Lastly, I think it's worth noticing that the Conservative Party's majority in the House of Commons depends upon a collection of constituencies in the north of England and the Midlands that hitherto it has never won. And those are, broadly speaking, industrial seats that require access to European markets, actually, for many of the working class kind of electorate. And I think that, again, is going to become a source of pressure. And just to sign off on this, I just think people should recognise the scale of the numbers in the UK are astonishing. GDP in calendar year 2020, as a result of COVID, will fall now with the second lockdown by 12 or 13%. That's a bigger fall even than the slump of 1931. The budget deficit will go to 20% of GDP, the biggest ever in UK history. The Bank of England will hold nearly 1 trillion, well, 850 billion pounds worth of government debt. These are unparalleled figures, and unwinding this situation, together with the COVID shock and the Brexit shock, is going to cost the UK economy dear in the years ahead, and will, I think, build a constituency. If the Europeans want to have Britain back, which is an open question, will build a big constituency for the UK rejoining the European Union. And one last point, which I think might be interesting to a Spanish audience. Scotland is a member of the UK, of course. The Scottish National Party is extremely strong. The polls have mounting majorities in favour of independence, and one of the chief reasons is because Scotland would join the European Union. And any British government, when there's an election in 2024, any British government that wants to keep the United Kingdom together is going to have a story to tell, a positive story to tell the Scots about Europe. Either that we're joining the single market and the customs union, or we're going to have a second referendum to rejoin the European Union. If you want to keep the UK together, if you want to carry on singing the national anthem, if you want to carry on having the Union Jack, which is very important to British Conservatives, you have to keep Scotland in the UK. To keep Scotland in the UK, you have to have a positive relationship with the European Union. And these political facts are coming home to roost in a big, big way. And I think the British Conservative Party is in the same fix as the Republican Party. And I think Boris Johnson is likely to go the same way as Donald Trump.
Okay. Well, we shall see. We shall see. Thank you so much, Will. That's a fantastic overview of the difficulties, the complexities, some of which are very practical, the timing of which we are all facing with all these major global issues, I think, whether it's UK, US, and the EU. When I used to look at the data, of course, there used to be Treasury forecasts, the government's own forecasts about Brexit, the impact on growth, which were not good. Then there were some other ones coming from different sources, and then the LSE ones, which were usually even worse, and saying, in the long run, these are the kind of numbers that we're talking about. So very, very severe. Of course, attempts to offset some of these with other trade deals around the world in some form. But of course, these are relatively unknown, and if you look at the data, of course, we all know the amount of trade between the UK and EU is paramount in the UK economy, without question. Coming back to you, Cecilia, if I may, talking about growth prospects, as you said, an extraordinary year. But when the time you were in office as Trade Commissioner, as we've mentioned before, growth in the European Union was approximately 2% a year. It was steady for the 4 years until COVID hit, I think. When I'm talking to some of our Latin American colleagues recently, as Manuel Santos, another LSE graduate, said, in Europe they say we'll do whatever it takes. And in Latin America they say we do whatever we can, because we don't have the resources and we don't have the sort of backup and we don't have the instruments in the same way that the UK is trying to, although the debt levels are shooting up. Within the European Union, we've been here before 10 years ago. Was it the same point of view about as you said, the 750 billion rescue plan? How long do you think it might take, if there are some reasonable scenarios for COVID and other issues, for that growth to become back to where it was at least? Or is that a kind of sustainable model within the medium-term future, let's say?
Well, according to the forecasts, growth will come back late next year with a 4% and then another 3% in 2022. But all that depends, of course, because the prognosis was slightly more optimistic during the summer, when we thought that the first wave had passed and we were sort of exiting the COVID crisis. But now we are entering it with full scale, and there could also be a third scenario, of course, because this will only end when we have a vaccine where we can start vaccinated in a large scale. And with a very much, most optimistic scenario, there will be a vaccine beginning of next year, but then that will have to be distributed, of course, to health staff and to the most vulnerable. So before you and I get access to that, it could well be the summer or next fall. So we need to be very careful. The whole process of agreeing this 750 billion euros was extremely painful. And it really took 5 days of negotiations, and there were lots of conflicts and divisions, and those wounds are still there. So even if that is a lot of money, and we have the long-term budget that was agreed as well, it will probably not be enough, because countries such as Spain, for instance, and Italy and a few others are very much hurt economically by the crisis, and of course also health-wise and saving. Spreading also in other countries. The question is, of course, whether we will be in the same situation in March. Can we agree on a new a new package? I don't know. I honestly don't know if that is.
Okay. We've lost you there slightly, I think.
Histories as well, and it was difficult already.
Okay. Will, we might come to you as Cecilia. We've lost the signal slightly there, I'm afraid. If we're coming back to you, and from your knowledge as well, and your thoughts on the way in which the European Union is reacting to the current crisis, and putting yourself in Brussels or somewhere else, do you, in your conversations with various people, do you feel that the European Union or the senior people within European policymakers have changed their views on Brexit? Do they want it to be done as quickly as possible, have a deal, and that's enough? Because they've had 4.5 years of this process, and how fed up are they? Or are they looking to say, find a way to leave a door back in the future that we may be able to come through?
I think there's no doubt the European Union would like a deal with the UK, and I think it's I mean, there's been pressure, hasn't there, from the German car industry that wants to retain access to the UK markets. The French have made it very clear, and so the Spanish actually, that actually access to close to 1 million square miles of waters in which a lot of fish is important for the kind of French and Spanish fishing fleets. And actually, there's been some give, I think, on access to mutual recognition of standards in the City of London. I mean, that's going to the city's going to remain kind of where Euro clearing takes place for at least the next 2 years. So there's been some give by the Europeans, but they've also, I think, prepared to stomach a deal in which Johnson will say, "Look how well I've done. I allow him to declare victory. He needs to do that domestically," and they understand that. That said, I mean, there is a certain Trumpian madness about Johnson and the people around him, and they Dominic Cummings, consistently says that's the kind of consigliere, the kind of Rasputin figure behind Boris Johnson, his chief policy advisor. He continually says that a no deal is virtually the same in terms of economic dislocation as a thin deal. And then we have autonomy over things like state aid, the UK. So I think it's very, very important for the EU to try to secure a deal with the UK. For this reason, that's the beginning, and it's the beginning of actually a series of deals that will follow. I mean, there will have to be a deal on services, which constitutes and particularly financial services and some dimensions of the creative industries and higher education and all of that in 2021 and 2022. There will be big pressure for the UK. The UK will want to be try to remain via the kind of relationship, for example, the LSE has struck with the Fundación, is the kind of relationship which Oxford University has struck with Berlin University. In an attempt to keep some British presence inside the EU, so one can bid for European research funds. All these kind of realities are going to put kind of immense pressure on the UK authorities to have to do bargains with the European Union. It just isn't going to go away. And I think if we can keep some kind of toehold, some kind of framework at the end of this year, then you can build on that framework. That can redefine the European economic area. That can be a way of kind of keeping Britain bridgeheading into the single market and the customs union. And it will allow, as I say, if Keir Starmer is to win an election, leader of the Labour Party in 2024, he needs to win seats in Scotland. To win seats in Scotland, he has to have a convincing narrative about heading off the Scottish National Party, and that has to include some kind of commitment to a close association with the European Union. And that's much better done on the basis of some kind of framework deal now than actually with nothing. So it's really, really important. And of course, the hard Brexiters know that. The Dominic Cummings and the Boris Johnsons know that. They know that if they have some kind of deal, they will leave some scope to rebuild a relationship that they don't want to do. So, it's game on. And I think I'm so thankful that we have President Biden.
Well,
we don't really know that for sure yet. I'm sorry, I fell out there for a little moment. I don't know if there's storms or if it's the political storms. The most logical thing would, of course, be to prolong the negotiation time and to say we need a little bit more time because of the COVID crisis, because negotiators have been ill, because of the turbulence. So, I mean, let's extend those talks for 6 months. We're almost there. We can make something really good together. And I think the EU would be ready to do that. But of course, that has been rejected by Prime Minister Johnson and for different reasons. So yes. We are stuck with this little time. But I wouldn't underestimate the huge Brexit fatigue that is spreading in several European countries who just feel that let's just get over with this. This has dominated our agenda. It's taken so much resources and energy. We need to focus on getting Europe together, and how we can consolidate not only economically and politically, but also a role in a geopolitical world that is increasingly hostile. So patience is running out, particularly in Paris, I think, but also in several other countries. So it's going to be really interesting to see what's happening those days. I hope that there is enough stamina to come to some conclusions. I hear what you're saying, Will, and I listen very carefully. It's extremely interesting. So let's see. The most reasonable thing would be to prolong with a few months, but I think we're done. We have passed that possibility.
I think, yes, I think it would be a sensible outcome, therefore unlikely to happen, unfortunately, because of where we are 4.5 years on. But I think it makes a very interesting point, as you mentioned, and to broaden it out a little bit, about the relations of the EU and the UK, in the rest of the world, and how integrated they are into the global economy. As you mentioned, Will, we are in the midst of, or the sort of end game of a presidential election. It looks fairly certain, according to the last few hours, that the next president will be Joe Biden. However, we're all aware that there are long legal wrangles that may well happen, and unexpected twists and turns, as we've seen for the last 4 years in particular. And I'm conscious of what we talked about before, Cecilia, in terms of the EU and US potential trade deal, something fundamental, as the director mentioned. Almost 50% of GDP becomes between those two trading blocs, let's call them, the US and the EU. If that scenario is correct, if President Biden and a Democratic administration, do you see major changes or something that will fast forward a possible trade deal, or are we going to still be in a situation that will take quite some negotiation? And secondly, the same question to you, Will, afterwards. But secondly, if we have another Trump administration, by looks unlikely, but it's not impossible, that would also change relations between the EU and the US when it comes to trade deals.
Well, relations have been very complicated the last 4 years, even though the transatlantic link is very strong, and there's a strong community of values and history and trade dependence, not least. So it's been sad to see those relations weakened. And in the trade area, we've seen not only the sort of postponement or putting in the freezer the TTIP negotiations, but also tariffs, steel and aluminium tariffs that US have struck on Europe and many other allies, with the motivation that steel exports to the US is a threat to national security. That is very offensive to hear from the point of view of your allies. There's also been this non-engagement of US in the WTO, blocking the appellate body, and now also blocking the appointment of a new director general, whereas the rest of the world has agreed on a candidate unanimously, and then US is blocking that. And there's also been these threats of car tariffs and car parts and wine and so on. And then we have a very long ongoing fight where both the US and Europe are sinners when it comes to Boeing and Airbus. This is also affecting the UK, of course. So it's been hard. And if Mr. Trump continues to be president, I think this will go on. There will be new tariffs. The focus will still be on China, but there will be more on Europe. If Mr. Biden, as you said, it looks likely, but it's still not totally certain, is president, I think most what we can expect on the short term is a different tone. He has said very clearly that he wants to work with allies. He believes in multilateralism. He thinks that these steel and aluminium tariffs are reckless, so they will probably disappear. And there will be an engagement to work together. But he hasn't been very clear on details there. So we would hope that we could work together and with other allies, UK, of course, but lots of other like-minded friends, to reform and strengthen and modernize the WTO. We hope that the tariffs will disappear. We hope that we can find a solution to this Airbus-Boeing, a negotiated solution. But I don't see it's very likely, at least not the first 2-3 years, that the TTIP negotiations will resume. The Democratic Party is not a traditionally free trade-oriented party, and it has gone further to the left in this regard during the last years. And Mr. Biden will focus his agenda very much on domestic problems. So this is not top priority at all. But what we can hope is a different tone, is a different prospect. We need to rebuild the trust as well. And then maybe we can do something small together, at least to have some positive agenda. But I don't see any TTIP. Anyway, it will not call TTIP. It will be something different. I don't see them resuming in the short term or even medium term.
Right. Will, perhaps you'd like to comment on that, and also perhaps mention the UK's position when it comes to UK-US trade deal, or the kind of global Britain that's being promoted by the current administration and the realities of that. But both from your views on the Europe and the UK, if you would.
Well, I mean, I'm picking up what Cecilia said. I mean, I think that I wholly agree in this respect that Biden's preoccupation will be domestic. I mean, it'll be COVID, inequality, kind of infrastructure, trying to do something about the kind of, he really is a man of, he wasn't educated in Ivy League University. He comes from a modest background. I mean, he is, and he sees himself as solidaristic with blue collar workers in the States, and we want to do something for them. So I think that that's, going to be his agenda. However, I think that on things like climate change, I think he's very committed to that, and I think he will rejoin the Paris Accords. I think he will. I don't think there's little public opinion cost to him from blocking the new leader of the World Trade Organization, or indeed kind of appointing an appellate judge. So I think the World Trade Organization reform and actually getting it back on its feet is something that I think Biden will do. I don't see. I'm sure of that. Actually, my friends in Washington assure me of that. As for trade deals, I mean, I think an EU-US trade deal is extraordinarily problematic because so rivalrous. There's not areas where there's natural kind of gains to be made from a trade deal here. The US wants access for its agricultural products, which the EU will resist to the last. And you can't get any trade deal through the EU Congress without 2/3 majorities in the Senate and the House. And given the geography of the United States, that means that the Midwestern agricultural states have a veto over it. If there's no access for farm products, then you aren't going to get very far. I think that Biden will place getting an EU-US trade deal before a UK one. I think that the British can expect to negotiate a trade deal rather like they have done with Japan, that'll be a shadow of the EU deal, but slightly less favourable. I mean, all the gains that the British kind of thought they'd got from kind of trying to improve on the EU deal fall massively to the Japanese. And I think it'll be the same story with any trade deal with the United States. But I'm not holding my breath on this. I think that the idea of a UK-US trade deal before an EU-US trade deal is moonshine with Joe Biden as president. And I think the same is true, frankly, if Trump is president, which is, when you see this, I think it'll almost be certain that Biden will be president. So that's my view.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, I think these are major issues, and as you mentioned, Cecilia, all of us witnessing the last year in particular, but that the social and domestic issues are going to be a very high priority and have been part of the campaign manifesto to help on Biden's side, certainly to help try and heal or and deal with the divisions within American society in general, as well as its role in the rest of the world, of course. So broadening out even more now and thinking about some of the other major global economic, both trading blocs and economic powers such as China or ASEAN and other parts of the world which play an increasing role, of course, in growth and in trade relations with the UK and the EU. Cecilia, how do you see that developing now, looking the other way, looking east instead of west for the European Union in terms of relations with China and other Southeast Asian, East Asian nations as something that would be a priority for the European Union and something that they would be spending increasing amounts of time negotiating new deals and new arrangements?
Well, we already have very advanced agreements with Japan, with South Korea, with Singapore, and Vietnam just recently entered into force as well. And there are discussions about building something regional between the EU and ASEAN. This is very premature, but at least there are discussions to see what can be done. And there are also negotiations ongoing, even if they are slow, with Indonesia, and then of course Australia and New Zealand. So there is a lot ongoing in those cases. When it comes to China, of course, relations are extremely complex. China is a very important market for the European Union, and European Union is a very important market for China. But relations are increasingly complex with the quite aggressive investment policies of China recently, with the Chinese policy of funding massively state-owned enterprises, with the interference between the party and the companies there, with the deterioration of human rights, etc. So lots of the critics that have been coming towards China from the US are shared by the European Union, even if the methods are not the ones that the European Union, we don't believe in trade wars. But with the Biden administration, I think there is a case where we could work jointly to put pressure together with their other allies on China to comply with WTO obligations, which they promised 15 years ago and they haven't, to sort of be a more level playing field. And maybe do something also when we have been cooperating when it comes to investment screening, when it comes to a slightly tougher line on China. So EU is becoming tougher on China. And even if this is mild comparing to what the US does, if you look at the last conclusions from the virtual summit that we held in September, the criticism vis-a-vis not only human rights, but also other things in China are much stronger than they used to be in statements coming from the European Union, which is an interesting move. So China, you will have to find a platform where you can work. You'll have to continue trading with China. You will have, of course, to work with China in the Paris context. China is the biggest polluter in the world, but it also has a lot of very advanced, interesting green technology. But we need to do that, defending values and pushing for a better level playing field. And that, I think, would be a difficulty for the European Union, because traditionally it's been hard to be united in its stand vis-a-vis China, and that has been used by China as well, rule and divide. And half of the member countries are part of this 16+1, this Belt and Road Cooperation, and others are not. But we see an increasingly convergence between EU member states. Whether that is a long-term trend or just right now remains to be seen. But I see a tougher joint line vis-a-vis China from the European Union the last year, I would say, 2 years.
Yeah. Okay, Will, perhaps you'd like to comment on that, and again, maybe some UK perspectives, perhaps including more of India or China or relations therein, if the attempts to try and negotiate better trade deals, especially having left the European Union, the reality of that, or whether it can be sustainable and whether it can help drive growth in the medium term is an open question. But any thoughts on that?
Well, I think the UK's kind of pivot to Asia and the growth in trade in Asia, which is one of the kind of battle cries of the Brexiter, is one of the most kind of delusional, increasingly kind of delusional kind of aspects of Brexit. It always was, but I think that the fifth plenum of the Chinese Communist Party that finished last week would really kind of emphasize what's going on. I mean, the Chinese are committed to promoting more self-sufficiency, and they're getting hawkish on all aspects of their trade deals and their trade relationships. For example, I mean, it's a huge story in Australia, but little reported in Europe. I mean, agricultural produce from Australia, particularly.
Wine.
I mean, you know, they just the Australian lobster industry is kind of dependent on Chinese markets, and all their live lobsters have been frozen at Chinese ports for kind of health and biological reasons, apparently. But I mean, you know, it's just kind of signaling to the Australians, you know, we're big and you need us. Kind of, they want it's and the Belt and Road Initiative, launched by Xi in 2013. I mean, Cecilia mentioned it. I mean, it's a huge deal. This, I mean, the money is allocated for infrastructure spending, already spent and about to be committed, cumulatively, 7 times larger than the Marshall Plan. 7 times larger than the Marshall Plan. And I mean, this is a major instrument of Chinese foreign policy. Now, I mean, both Austria and Italy are signatories of the Belt and Road Initiative. So trying to get, an EU to be tough on China over, for example, what it's doing in Hong Kong or what it's doing with the Uyghurs or its bellicose kind of stance on trade or its bellicose stance on Taiwan. The Italians and the Austrians are signatories to a document which actually declares they have to be sympathetic to globalization with Chinese characteristics and accept that actually Chinese definitions of human rights, which are that your human right is to collectively share in economic and social advance. Your human right is not to vote, to have jury trial, to be imprisoned after a trial, etc., etc., etc. And even in some of the documents that they get people to sign, they say that it's not your human right, for example, not to eat pork. So that you can't, if the Chinese come down on Muslim communities in China, you can't protest. Now, this is and they're talking about money which is 7 times bigger than the Marshall Plan. Now there is a consensus in Washington, a correct consensus, I think, that actually you have to confront this, that they have not actually played ball with WTO rules. And I think that one of the things that we can look forward to with the Biden administration is trying to resurrect the WTO, and then, as Cecilia has said, work with the Europeans to try and put some pressure on China. But I mean, the notion that there's a UK trade deal with China in this context, it's kind of, it's dreamland. And the notion that the Asian trade growth as the principal economy in Asia kind of decides to become kind of more autarkic. And this is where there's a kind of the trends of the last 25 years and continue to the next decade is, again, I think, a kind of a big error. And the Australians want a deal with the EU rapidly and for good reason. I mean, they need to kind of orientate themselves to European markets. And the idea also that the Indians under President Modi are kind of gagging to do a trade deal with the UK. I mean, they'll have noticed that 300,000 Hong Kong passport holders have been offered residence in the UK. They will want a one quid pro quo is going to be kind of access for Indian nationals to join their families in the UK. And actually, a nativist kind of Tory party, keenly aware of the dangers of immigration, can't sign that deal. So, and anyway, trade deals work best with countries that are near to you. All the evidence is that you do trade with proximate countries. There's some iron laws of economics, demand and supply interact. You can't spend more than you've got, and you can't do lots of trade with countries that are 10,000 miles away. I mean, these are just like night follows day. And so, I mean, there will not be the trade deals in Asia or in America to compensate for the loss of trade with the EU. That's one of the reasons why I'm pessimistic about growth prospects in the EU, in the UK, and why I predict that one of the most popular causes in Britain, building on the strongest pro-European movement in the EU, paradoxically, will be let's get together with our fellow Europeans. Watch this space.
Watch this space. Very good. Well, we'll hold you to that because we're recording, so we'll pay it back at the Christmas party at LSE and see where we are every year and see where we are. But no, it's a very good point, and I think there is for a country that has been, I wouldn't say integrated, but certainly has had very global connections for 100 plus years in the UK. The world has changed enormously in that period, so it's not in the same negotiating position with its economy than obviously it was many years ago, and it is going to be much more complicated when those economies, emerging economies, or now quite well-developed economies have much more clout and power than they used to many years ago, I think. So I'm conscious of the time of this wonderful session. I think we have a few more minutes left. I really wanted to leave that open to both of you, perhaps starting with Cecilia, to think about any final comments on the future of the European Union as well. We've covered a lot of ground here today, but are there specifics that you think that we'll have to wait and see, or is there momentum within the European Union for more Europe to help the sustainability and the growth and the strength of the European Union as a whole, given all these external shocks or internal shocks where the COVID pandemic has hit, but plus the volatility, let's say, in the US situation and others. So a point of view from inside, if you would, to finish.
Well, hopefully there is a momentum for the European Union to work with allies to rebuild, to strengthen the multilateral system, the predictability of global trade rules, of other international organizations, and work also together to defend the trade system, but also work, as we talked about just a couple of minutes ago, certain values and level playing field. I'm talking about China right now. But whatever happens with that, the European Union needs to do its lesson as well. So it needs to recover economically and health from the crisis. It needs to continue taking the leadership, preferably with others as well, on the greening of the economy, the greening of our societies.
Sure.
Climate crisis is much bigger than the COVID crisis and is going to last for a long time. It's urgent. We need to also to make sure that the European Union can be a bigger global player, because of course now we've been squeezed between the US and China and not really knowing how to act. So we need to be more united, need to formulate a stronger strategic vision vis-a-vis other players and the world, change a little bit the decision making there. That's more easy said than done, but it has to be done. And also show that the European Union sticks together in this crisis. And we have problematic issues within the European Union as well when it comes to respect for rule of law and democracy within the Union, and that has to be dealt with as well. So the European Union grew in a moment where there was a certain world order, and that world order is severely weakened. So you have to find a new role there, and that's new territory for the European Union, but it has to be done. It cannot only be an economic superpower, it has to be a political and also slowly a security power as well. So that is very much the identity crisis right now that everybody is talking about. And with the loss of a big and important member country such as the UK, this in some ways will facilitate the decision making, but it will also make the EU poorer in a way, but it has to be done. So this is a sort of momentum for good and bad created by the Brexit. And but despite the crisis and the COVID, because that limits also physical and concrete meetings and discussions. So it's still embryonic, but it has to conclude in the EU taking that role and possibly changing some of its of the institutions and the decision making, but overall uniting to vis-a-vis stronger joint strategies.
Thank you very much indeed. Will, a last few comments on a similar thought, or the UK too? Yeah, please.
Thank you. I mean, I doubt whether the EU would have reached agreement on the 750 billion euro recovery fund had Britain been a member state. And I noticed with interest that actually even Viktor Orban is foursquare behind Michel Barnier, and I thought it's important that the EU managed to reach this agreement that actually not meeting kind of acquis communautaire would have budgetary costs, and actually that's painful to negotiate, but actually we got there. The EU got there, which means that actually both the Polish and Hungarian government are on notice that actually the flows of money to both countries, if they carry on down this course, are kind of could be cut off. That's. I think curiously Brexit is actually even Marine Le Pen no longer talks about Frexit, and it's kind of the Italians leaving the European Union it was talked about has also gone away right down the political agenda in both countries. because the costs are obvious. I mean, I think Britain will do the European Union a great service. And when the pictures come through in January and February of queues of 7,000 lorries at British ports and shortages of key kind of fresh foods and maybe some key medicines, and actually, the British government kind of requiring some kind of settlement by the summer to open things up and minimize dislocation. Everyone in Europe is going to watch for that and witness it. It's also emphasized actually what gains there have been. I mean, the European Union is a standard setter, a world standard setter. In many areas, from specialist chemicals through foods, the European standards are becoming global standards, and not to be part of that is huge. And again, these things weren't obvious to some member states; they are obvious now. So curiously, I think the European Union is in kind of got more solidaristic and a stronger sense of itself as a result of Brexit and as a result of some of these external challenges. And even the euro is kind of riding high. I mean, a currency that traders, when it was launched in 2000, referred to as a toilet currency,
yes,
is emerging as a reserve asset currency to match the dollar.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the EU, of course, it's difficult in, aligning interests of member states, and it's unbelievably difficult. But actually, I'm impressed by the way it's holding, and I'm optimistic actually for the future of the European Union. I'm optimistic actually for European companies. I also think, another area that Biden's going to be important in. We've talked climate change. We've talked the World Trade Organization. I think, and I'm interested to hear what Cecilia has to say about this. I think that the EU and the US together could really challenge the high-tech monopolies. I think if you're running Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, or Google, Apple, the notion of the EU and the American competition authorities kind of coalescing around issues of data privacy and separating out the platforms from the content and all the agenda about breaking them up. I mean, goodness me. There's lots of scope for the EU and the United States to work together on that, on China, on climate change. And, we shouldn't underestimate the importance of Biden's election, as I'm sure is going to take place. And none of this would have been opened up had Trump been elected. So he may not have a majority in the Senate, but there's still lots and lots that he can do that are very positive.
Thank you. Cecilia, do you want to comment on that? Just on the European Union and the major tech companies? Just a short comment before we finish.
Well, this is an issue that has been very much debated also in the US, and I think a Democrat administration would be favorable of doing something here, and this is certainly an area where cooperation could be done, and also on privacy issues to get a new privacy shield, because this is important for business as well, and for citizens and consumers. So there are lots of areas where we could resume cooperation. Some of it might even be done with the Trump administration, but a lot more can be done with the Biden administration. Mr. Biden said that the first thing he would do after his installation would be to rejoin the Paris Agreement, and that certainly opens up a lot of new possibilities as well for cooperation on green technology, for instance, and on green standard setting, so that we can have standards that we set and not the Chinese.
Nice. Yes. No, I think it's a fascinating point and a subject. Sorry, Will.
I think it's almost a good point to end on, actually.
Yes.
I think zero carbon by 2050 is now much likelier. I mean, a lot of British companies and European companies already committed to it, even before what the EU and the US governments may come to an agreement on. So I mean that's a big deal, and
Yes.
Given Extinction Rebellion and all of that, we should say yes to that.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's one thing we can all agree on. I think that's definitely the case. But it just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining in this LSE debate with the Foundation, Dr. Cecilia Malmström and Will Hutton. It's been a fascinating discussion, broad-ranging, and what, of course, as Will knows very well, I'm sure Cecilia will soon, of course, that we like to have a big global perspective from the LSE. It's a big global institution, and so being able to bring in all of those experiences at the highest level and policy, economics, and across the UK and Europe, but of course across the world, is something where we get the best perspective to try and understand what is going on and what is to be done. So thank you so much, both of you. We shall remain in touch, and thanks again to the Foundation for hosting today. And we shall hope to see you again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fundación. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.